I described this instrument in the broadcaster, and I was looking for something old before I left, at least to waste my money on. And this came up, so I bought this just before I left. And I really like old instruments, old test equipment. And what's interesting, though, is as you go farther back in time, most of the instruments weren't used for radios as such. They were used for other purposes. But be that as it may, they still look great, and they still are very interesting. But for the most part, they're extremely complicated to use, and you have to give credit to guys that use these things. I don't know if any of you got a chance to read the instructions, but the combination of all the resistance, well, actually, basically what it is, it's used to test the resistance of cables, mostly electrical cables and underwater cables. And by measuring the resistance at certain periods of time, they could see that the cable hasn't deteriorated. And if they get a really bad value, there's a formula that they could use depending on the size of the wire and such, and knowing the resistance of the wire, where they actually could find out exactly at what point the wire's bad. Maybe it's there's a high resistance connection or something like that. So this particular item used the typical Wheatstone bridge, which I'm pretty much you're all familiar with, and it also used something called a Murray loop, which was also similar to the Wheatstone bridge, a little different, but it was mostly used for transatlantic underwater cables. It was easier to use than the Wheatstone bridge. And again, if you happen to look at the directions, to get it to work really good and to get an accurate reading, there's all kinds of suggestions on the combination of resistances to use to do it. So like I said, the guys that were using this stuff, they were technicians. They weren't scientists, but they really had to know what they were doing to use it. But it's a beautiful piece, and luckily when the cover is closed, it keeps the instrument in pretty good shape. This one is in really good shape because it's got the handle in it, which you don't usually find, and the case is in really good shape. It's got an internal battery used for the bridge, to balance the bridge, and a galvanometer, which indicates when the bridge is balanced. And I opened it up. Of course, the batteries aren't in there, but you can use external batteries too, so actually it's workable. And I went on the web. I found one exactly the same as far as the workings go, and it had a date on it of 1898. But what was kind of neat about that one was it looked exactly the same. However, instead of this sort of like clasp type closing mechanism, they had a lock and key, a little like you'd find in a chest or something. Why you would want to lock this up, I have no idea. But I guess it was a Victorian type style case, so they wanted to make it kind of a little nicer. So that's that.
And that's leads in your throat?
No, this is called it's called the Queen Acme portable testing set. It was made in Philadelphia, and these guys made a ton of test instruments, and some of them are works of art. If you've ever seen some of them in really great condition, they're just mechanically and the way that they're laid out and all the brass, it's just something really. We appreciate it. I'm sure that your wife wouldn't, but but I kind of like it.
What's the date on it?
This is it was calibrated 1916, so it's just about 100 years old. But the thing goes back to 1898, so they add another 8 years to that when the technology was still good.
It was still
Actually, the wire that they use for the coils in here for the resistances was a magnum, I believe, and it was temperature resistant. In other words, this didn't really need a correction for temperature, which was pretty good at that time. So it was very accurate. problem was you had to know how to use it correctly.
Any idea what it had cost at that time?
Oh, I'm sure it did cost a lot of money. I have no idea, but the only reference I could find, I found one from the Minnesota Mine Museum, and they had one from 1898, but they didn't have the cost. Okay, I got this at Kutztown, and by someone who well known. I think he's.
That's a perfect Father's Day gift.
Yeah, and it's a tie with the RCA logo on it, which pretty neat. The red colors, and it's got a little for the tie clasp. It's got a little RCA CRT hanging down on it, so it's kind of neat. And on the clasp it says Radio Electric Service Company. And basically, it was probably given out as an award. The Radio Electric Service Company, the only thing I could find about it was that it was born in 1932 in Baltimore. And apparently what they did was, they were sort of like an adjunct, not by ownership, but sort of an adjunct of RCA, and they did a lot of their work. They did a lot of their installation work and everything. Nowadays, they still exist, and what they're called an electromechanical company. They do a lot of industrial work in, running cooling systems and instrumentation systems and like that. So I guess they gave this out as some kind of an award, or maybe as a dinner.
Instead of a raise, they gave that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is gold. No, anyway. So that's that. I think it's kind of cool. And the last item I got from Corbett auction. If you remember that auction, it wasn't really an auction. It was a sale of that fellow that collected mostly homemade radios. And I brought it in because I thought it was kind of neat as far as a maker goes. It's really amazing the work that the guy did on this. And it was all handmade. Of course, it's a variable coil, and you can move it in and out to vary the inductance. And you could also select the winding with this little guy. And if you look closely on it, you can see that the guy really did a pretty cool job. Some of the stuff you could tell it was really homemade. I don't think the base goes with it. I think he put the base on separately, because I was looking at the screws on the bottom, and they look really too good regarding, when you associate it with the age of this thing. So the base may not be the same vintage. But, years ago, you didn't want to spend any money for one of these, and you had the time and you had the talent, and this still works. It works well. So it's another example of what guys used to do back then instead of going out and buying stuff, So that's about it. Any questions? Okay.